Now we want to come back, and if we get too far from where you think you're going with this, rein us back in. But we want to talk just a little bit about where you began with this idea of seer, because we think that in discussing this just a little bit, it will get to the heart of something that is bigger. When you look into a physical environment and you use your physical eyes, you have learned over time to focus your eyes in a specific way, even though there are all kinds of other things that most of you usually do not see. It does not mean they are not there. It means that you have not trained yourself to see them. It's like your dog can hear things that you can't hear. And the fact that you can't hear them doesn't mean they are not there. It means you have not yet trained your ears to hear them. Your dog can smell things that you can't smell and maybe wouldn't want to. And it's not because those things are not there. It is because you have not trained or developed your decipherer as specifically as the beast that is having that experience. So these seers are humans who have understood that there is more to see than easily meets the eye, who have in most cases learned to soften the vision of what they are demanding their eyes to see, which allows them to use a different part of their seeing mechanism in order to see. And those words that we have offered you there, it is true of all aspects of seeing. It requires looking at something from a different vantage point in order to afford yourself interaction with it in a different way. Some people see auras. They will watch Esther as Abraham is pouring through her, and they will be amazed at the light show, while others will look and say, what is it that you are seeing? I don't see anything. It is a very common thing for someone to know that there is a presence in the room, and just because others in the room could not see does not mean that there was not something there that she was sensing. Very often, someone will catch something out of the corner of their eye, something very real. But when they look, they do not see it, and then they assume they were imagining it, where what was happening is looking straight on at something is using your physical eyes in the physical way of focusing them that you've become accustomed to, which usually only lets you see physical stuff that you've trained your eye to see. While what you see peripherally is a softer vision, and you often then can interpret energy in different ways. So this time-space reality, this is something that you can see and feel and hear. In other words, it feels real. It is reality. And you say, so this is real while the ghost that I saw probably isn't. And we say, you cannot say that one is realer than the other. They are both interpretations. This is nothing more than an interpretation. It just feels realer because more people over longer time have interpreted it. And because there's so much agreement on this reality. So then the seer, who is able to interpret a reality that others do not see, is often hanged or burned at the stake or touted as evil because he has learned to use his interpreters more broadly or more specifically.
Right. That was good. So when I was young, before 2 years old, I remember really wanting to be able to perceive the way my parents perceive. And I remember seeing black blobs in the room with my parents, and they were repulsive, and I commanded them to leave the room, and it didn't work. It seemed like they were feeding off of my parents. And so my question is mankind effective at an unconscious level by low vibrational, non-physical beings?
Yes, now we talk about how there's not a source of darkness, and we're not kidding you about that.
Right.
Do you see energy at all? Sometimes?
Yes.
As you look at Esther's body and try to look through her, rather than focusing on one of her features, soften your vision. You may be a bit close. We will step back just a little bit. Sometimes it is easier if there's a little greater distance. And look at her, or better still, through her. Pretend that there is a spot on the wall behind her that you would like to see. And so you're softening your vision as your eyes reach her and you're looking right through her so that your point of focus is 20 feet behind her. You get a sense of what we were talking about? And as your point of focus is 20 feet behind her, it will soften your vision as your vision approaches where she is. Raise your eyes just a little bit. Look more to the center of her. Now, as you are looking at her, you begin to notice a sort of energy around her. Don't be alarmed if you don't see it, but just relax and see if you do not see energy. It's sort of like a shadow, but instead of the absence of light, it is the presence of light. Getting a look at it. Goose it up just a little bit. Now, what this is, can you see it? Not really?
Not with certainty.
Now what happens is, just keep looking softly. Just take your time and no big thing if you see it or not. It is energy that is there. You might catch a glimpse of it, you might not, but just keep looking at it. Keep watching. Just keep looking at Esther, and we'll goose it up just a little bit here. What it is, it's just energy leakage, but it is energy that is actually visible if you soften your eyes. Now, as we move from it, sometimes you can still see it. In other words, because it is energy. Now, what happens is, as you were little, and you are able to see that. In other words, it is your way of life. You look at the tree and you see that. You look at your own hands and see that. In other words, when you are littler, there's all kinds of that. And we believe that what was happening to you is you began to decipher visually the stronger presence of energy or the absence of energy. Now, in the same way that as we were chatting on things, we were talking about source energy, what was flowing through us was light force or God force or whatever it is you're wanting to call it. And as we chewed longer and it actually congealed, it actually became something that was decipherable by the eye. In the same way, if someone is chewing on things that they're worried about, if they are upset about things, so that they are gathering around them energies that are denser and fuller of that, fuller of contradiction or contrast, someone whose eyes were sensitive to the light would interpret the absence of that as well. You getting the? We are always wanting to be very delicate as we approach this subject, because it feels like there are bad things that have the power to assert. That's what your question is about. And what we are saying to you is, everything is a vibrational match, and every thought that has ever been thought exists. One day, a woman brought to us a very wonderful question. She lived here in this Bay Area, and she said, Abraham, I've been driving across this long Bay Bridge for many, many years, and I've never felt any concern about it at all. And last week, I was driving across, and I felt absolute panic. She said, I thought I was going to have to lay on the floor of my car. I've never been so afraid. She said, what happened to me? And we said, well, it sounds to us like you bumped into some thought forms, which she didn't like the sound of. And she said, what do you mean? And we said, well, a lot of people pass over those bridges. Often they are tourists. It's the first time on such a bridge. It's a long bridge, and so they can get a pretty good run of the thought going. So people cross over the bridge, and they feel fear as they cross over. And then the thought is there. And law of attraction gathers those thoughts. And so there's a sort of congealing of the thought. And so a congealing of a thought, of a similar thought, becomes that which you would call a thought form. And we said to her, you bumped into a thought form. We said, now, thought forms of joy, thought forms of despair are around you all the time. In other words, there are rivers of thoughts because there have been so many billions of people that have been offering thought in your environment. We said the question that we are wanting to ask you is, what has happened in your experience that has made you suddenly a vibrational match to a thought form where you never have been before? She knew right away. She said, my neighbor was burglarized. And we've been talking, we've been having community meetings about what to do and how to keep it from happening, and about whether to put bars up or alarms in. And so she recognized right away, once she got the sense of how it works, that she had had exposure to an experience that had caused her to begin offering a vibration of vulnerability. And as she went across the bridge, still radiating this vibration of vulnerability, she connected with thought form that she had not had access to before. And so that's what you saw. And do they feed on you? Not at all. In other words, law of attraction just brings everything that is a vibrational match together. You're not vulnerable to it ever. Sometimes we feel our physical friends feeling vulnerable. It's like, I need to be guarded of those things. It's really scary. It was bad enough to have to watch out for big things that I could see, like trains running over me and monsters in the bushes. But now there are invisible thought forms having feeding frenzies, and we say there is not anything for you to feel vulnerable about because your well-being is so dominant. But sometimes you can hold yourself in a thought long enough that you disallow that light, and in the absence of it you conclude darkness, and then you think there's a source of it when there is not.
We were talking about death.
Oh, death is the most glorious of experiences. Imagine in one fell swoop, leaving behind all doubt and fear and worry, and knowing in that moment fully who you are, knowing the all is wellness of where you be and where everyone else bees as well. In other words, physical beings have distorted the idea of death so dramatically. Think about it. Almost the day you were born, they start getting you to worry about it. Watch out, that could kill you. Or they drag you to funerals where everyone is sad. You give the death penalty to those you despise the most. In other words, you never give the death reward. You always see it as something horrible, you see. When what it is it's not different from a change of focus. It isn't different than walking out of one movie theater into another, or getting up from this room and walking into another, because your consciousness is eternal, you see.
As the dream shifts into another dream.
Very good. Your dreams are the closest thing you are living to give you a sense of that. However, there is more continuity in your non-physical awareness than in your dream state. It's not fractured and fragmented and skipping all over the place. You have a much greater sense of who you are, and an abiding sense of well-being, and an eagerness for every moment that you are expressing.
What would be contrast in your world?
Well, remember that contrast, when we use the word contrast, physical humans almost always make it an extreme thing. So they think of lovely and awful, or they think of agony and ecstasy. And by contrast, we are talking about variety and difference. The difference between you from your non-physical perspective, or most humans from their physical perspective, is in the deciphering of the contrast. And in an easy to understand way, it is this. In your physical format, you tend to sift through it, identify what is not wanted, and then get fixated on that. Got to do something about that. War against drugs, war against poverty, war against AIDS, war against cancer, war against all kinds of things not wanted. Where in your non-physical format, you evaluate the contrast, identify what is not wanted, what is wanted, and then your emphasis is upon what is wanted. So the inner being part of you yeses your way through the contrast, while the physical human sometimes knows your way through. And that's part of what we're wanting you to understand, is that there's no such thing as no. Everything is yes. When you see something wanted, you say yes to it. You include this thing wanted in your experience. When you say no to something, you include this thing not wanted in your experience. While your inner being understands all of that, the non-physical part of you knows that. And so the deciphering of contrast is a different thing.
Good.
It is good. Yes. Okay, yes.